Her name is Kaitlyn Morgan. 28, broke and dragging a rain-soaked suitcase down the streets of Portland after being kicked out of her parents' home. Her crime? Daring to chase her dream, leaving behind a safe but soul-crushing job to build a jewelry business no one believed in. The people who raised her, who preached self-reliance, shut the door in her face when she needed them most. No money, no backup plan, no place to sleep. But fate had its own plans. That very same night, buried in the pocket of her coat, was a forgotten lottery ticket, one that would soon make her a multimillionaire. The twist. She wouldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about power. About reclaiming everything they tried to take from her. What would you do if the world threw you out and destiny let you buy it back? Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below. I was Kaitlyn Morgan, 28 years old, and in less than 6 hours, my entire life unraveled. The house I grew up in, nestled in a tidy, tree-lined suburb of Portland, had once been a safe place, though never truly a warm one. That night it became something else entirely. A battlefield, a courtroom, and then, without warning, a place I no longer had the right to stay. My parents, Robert and Linda, had always believed in one path to success: college, corporate job, retirement plan. Predictable. Secure. They built their lives around rules and structures, and they expected Ethan, my younger brother, and me to fall in line. Ethan, ever the golden boy, worked at a consulting firm, wore pressed shirts, and brought the right kind of girlfriend to Thanksgiving. I, on the other hand, made jewelry. From stones and metal and bits of discarded beauty I found at flea markets. I crafted things that shimmered with the kind of magic you can't explain to someone who measures life in spreadsheets. That night I told them I was leaving my job. A steady, mid-level position at a marketing firm. Nothing glamorous, but enough to satisfy their definition of real work. I had held on to it for 5 long years. Every day I felt a little more of myself die behind that desk. But I stayed. For them. Till now. I'd prepared my pitch like I was presenting to investors. My Etsy sales were climbing, a boutique downtown had started carrying my pieces, and I had just applied for a modest studio apartment above a bookstore. I wasn't running away, I was building something. I thought they'd be skeptical. Maybe disappointed. I never imagined they'd retaliate. What do you mean you quit? My father barked, his fork clattering against his plate. Are you out of your mind? My mother's voice was soft but colder. Kaitlyn, do you honestly think you can survive selling trinkets online? They're not trinkets, I replied, trying to keep calm. This is my business. I have a plan. You call that a plan? My father stood, pacing. Ethan told us you were looking at apartments. You were planning to leave and didn't even have the decency to tell us. I froze. Ethan. The only one I thought I could trust in this house. I looked at him across the table. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't think it would come to this, I said. But I'm not asking for your permission. You don't get to make reckless choices under this roof, Dad snapped. You live here. You use our resources. Our insurance. Our car. You don't get to play artist on our dime. I never asked you for anything, I said, shaking with rage. I've saved. I've worked. I'm doing this on my own. You want independence? His tone shifted, sharp and final. Fine. Then start tonight. Pack your things. You're out. Robert, my mother said, alarmed but not exactly protesting. Isn't that a bit extreme? No, he said. She wants to be a grown-up. Let her find out what that means. I couldn't feel my legs. I was just standing there, numb. Ethan cleared his throat. Maybe it's for the best, he said. You've always been different. Different. Not gifted. Not brave. Not determined. Just different. The family code word for wrong. I went upstairs, dizzy with humiliation. My bedroom hadn't changed much since high school. Soft lavender walls, a shelf of books, a tiny desk where I first learned to wire wrap stones into necklaces. I stared at the space, now just 4 walls that no longer belonged to me. I opened the closet. My suitcase, bright blue, a birthday gift from my grandmother before she passed, waited on the top shelf. She used to tell me, keep this ready, Kaitlyn. You never know when the world will call you toward something bigger. Now the world wasn't calling. It was kicking me out. I shoved clothes in. Practical things. Layers. Shoes that could take rain. A small box of jewelry tools. I picked through my trays of beads and metal pieces trying to decide what to keep. Every choice felt like cutting away a part of myself. My hands trembled as I zipped the suitcase shut. At midnight I sat on my bed staring at the wall. I remembered something. Tuesday. The lottery. I played every week, using the numbers my grandmother had written in an old notebook she gave me before she died. A silly ritual, but one that felt like a thread back to her. I opened the lottery app on my phone. A maintenance screen blinked back at me. System updates in progress. Please check back in 6 to 8 hours. Of course. Even the universe was off duty tonight. I silenced my phone and lay back against the pillow. My world had been reduced to a suitcase, a hoodie, and a handful of unreturned calls. What haunted me most wasn't what I was leaving behind, but how easy it had been for them to let me go. No tears came. Not yet. Just a hollow ache that settled deep in my ribs. No one knew it yet, not even me, but that ticket sitting in my coat pocket was about to prove everyone wrong. Tomorrow wouldn't look anything like today. Rain was still falling when I stepped out the front door, my suitcase thumping against each stair as I dragged it behind me. My father didn't say another word, just stood in the entryway with his arms folded, like a landlord watching a late tenant leave. My mother hovered near the kitchen doorway, silent but watching. Neither one offered to help. I didn't expect them to. The air was cold and damp, and my jacket, too thin for this weather, soaked through within minutes. I stood at the end of the driveway holding my phone in one hand, suitcase in the other, unsure of where to go. I didn't have an apartment yet. Just a dream. And that wasn't much shelter against the storm. My first call was to Haley, my best friend since college. She always told me she'd be there if I ever needed her. The call rang 5 times before it picked up. "Kate," she said, her voice muffled under airport noise. "You sound awful. What's going on?" "My parents kicked me out," I said, struggling to keep my voice from shaking. "I don't have anywhere to go." Pause. Then, "Oh my God. I'm flying to Phoenix for that conference, remember? I won't be back until Sunday." The panic rose a little higher. She sounded genuinely sorry, but sorry didn't make room for me. I thanked her anyway and moved on. Jenna was next. Her line went to voicemail. Sam had family visiting from out of state and offered to ask his girlfriend, but I could hear the hesitation. I declined. My 4th and 5th calls ended similarly. Too far, too crowded, too complicated. By the 6th rejection the feeling shifted. It was no longer desperation. It was numbness. I wasn't angry at any of them. Not really. I knew people had lives, obligations, limits. But standing there in the dark, soaked through, dragging a bright blue suitcase like a lost tourist in my own life, I couldn't stop the shame from settling into my chest. I started walking toward downtown. It was almost a reflex. If I kept moving, I wouldn't have to think too hard. My suitcase wheels clicked unevenly over the sidewalk, splashing into puddles, catching in cracks. Cars hissed past, spraying dirty water onto my jeans. I must have looked like someone who had lost everything. As I had. It took me nearly an hour to reach the Pinewood Motel. I had passed it countless times on the bus or during weekend walks. A place you never noticed until you needed it. The flickering neon vacancy sign buzzed weakly. I stepped into the lobby, the warm air smelling like cigarette smoke and pine cleaner. The woman behind the counter looked up from a newspaper. She wore thick glasses, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun. Her name tag read Rebecca. "Rough night, sweetheart?" she asked, her eyes scanning my soaked jacket and tear-streaked cheeks. "You could say that," I said. She nodded like she'd seen it all before. "How long you need the room?" "Just one night. Please." "$69 plus tax," she replied. I opened my wallet and counted out $75 in damp bills. That left me with $267. She handed me a key with a plastic tag marked Room 4. "Checkout's at 11. Continental breakfast starts at 6. Nothing fancy, but the coffee's decent." I murmured a thank you and took the key. The room looked exactly like I expected. Floral bedspread, beige carpet, a small TV bolted to the wall. But it was clean, dry, quiet. And in that moment it felt like safety. I peeled off my wet clothes and stepped into the tiny shower, letting the hot water run over me. I sat on the floor, steam rising, tears blending with water. I didn't cry for them. I cried for me, for the weight of everything I had carried and everything I now had to leave behind. Through the thin walls I could hear voices, Rebecca and someone else, arguing softly in the next room. "We have to pay the electric first," she said. "The credit card can wait." A man replied, voice low and frustrated. "They'll shut the power off, Becky." Her sigh echoed. "Then we'll have no guests at all." I wrapped myself in one of the scratchy motel towels and sat on the edge of the bed, chilled and tired. Hearing their struggle made mine feel less isolating. We were all just trying to hold on. I opened my backpack. My old laptop still worked. I checked my bank account. $2,318 in savings. That was it. I had my tools. Some wire, stones, pliers, but not nearly enough to restart my business. There was an email from the apartment manager I'd contacted earlier in the week. "Looking forward to showing you the studio tomorrow at 3 p.m. I stared at the screen. That dream was slipping through my fingers. I pulled out a notebook and turned to a blank page. I wrote a list. Find temporary housing. Get a job that pays cash. Rebuild savings. Restart jewelry business when stable. Each line felt like surrender. I hated writing it. I was exhausted. But I wasn't giving up. Not yet. I whispered into the quiet room as if she might hear me. "Grandma, I'm not quitting. I'm just regrouping." Outside the rain fell harder. But inside I closed my eyes, not knowing that somewhere in my coat pocket, a miracle was waiting. The motel room was still dark when my phone alarm buzzed at 7:30 a.m., its harsh tone slicing through the remnants of uneasy sleep. For a few seconds I didn't remember where I was. The unfamiliar ceiling. The hum of traffic from the nearby highway. The thin blanket twisted around my legs. And then it all returned. Last night, the rain, the suitcase, the motel key on the chipped nightstand. I sat up slowly, my body heavy as if the weight of the night hadn't left with the darkness. I reached for my phone to silence the alarm, expecting nothing more than a few texts from Amber checking in or maybe another useless promotional email. But the notification sitting at the top of the screen made me freeze. "Congratulations, you've won." My heart gave a confused, almost annoyed thud. Another scam ad, I thought. Just a marketing trick to get me to click the lottery app. I'd seen it before. Still, some small part of me, probably the same stubborn spark that refused to give up last night, made me open the app anyway. The loading wheel spun longer than usual, and when the results appeared I blinked, convinced I was still dreaming. Winning numbers. 0, 8, 17, 23, 42, 54, 09. I stared. Then I reached for my coat, still damp from the night before, and fished through the pocket. My fingers touched the thin paper of the ticket I'd bought on Friday, just like I did every week. I smoothed it flat on the bed. Same numbers. Every single one. For a full minute I just sat there staring. My brain refused to process it. My fingers trembled as I reopened the app, double-checked, refreshed the screen. Still the same result. I opened the official Powerball website. There they were again. I looked at the prize amount and felt the air vanish from my lungs. $94 million. The lump sum option after taxes came out to about $37 million. "This can't be real," I whispered. My hands shook as I called the number listed on the lottery website. Pray. Then again. And again. My breath was shallow, like my body didn't trust me to handle what was happening. Finally, a woman answered. Her voice was calm, official, practiced. "Oregon State Lottery Commission. How may I help you?" I think I won," I stammered. "But I need to know it's not a mistake." She asked me to read off the numbers and the ticket's barcode. I complied, my voice barely steady. There was a pause. A long one. "Ms. Morgan," she said finally, her tone shifting to something more serious, "I can confirm that you are in possession of a winning ticket for last night's draw." I couldn't breathe. "You're eligible for the full jackpot. I advise you to sign the back of the ticket immediately. We also recommend consulting a financial advisor and an attorney before claiming the prize." I grabbed a pen from the nightstand and scribbled my signature on the back before I even hung up the call. My hand was barely functional. I felt lightheaded, the room spinning. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked gently. "No. Yes. I don't know," I gasped. "Thank you." When the call ended, I stayed frozen on the edge of the bed, ticket still in my hand, the voice of that woman echoing in my mind. $37 million. Less than 12 hours ago I was walking through the rain with everything I owned in a suitcase. I had exactly $267 left in my name. I was homeless. Now I could buy the entire block this motel sat on. A laugh escaped me. Then another. Soon I was laughing so hard I couldn't stop, the kind of laugh that teeters on the edge of hysteria. A knock came at the door. "Everything okay in there, honey?" Rebecca's voice filtered in through the thin wood. I rushed to the door and opened it. My hair was still a mess, my hoodie from the night before still damp. I looked every bit like someone who'd slept in a motel after getting kicked out of their home. "I won," I whispered. Her brow furrowed. "Won what?" "The lottery. The Powerball." I won." I pulled her inside and closed the door. My hands were still trembling as I pointed to the app and the ticket. Rebecca's eyes widened, her mouth parting in disbelief. "All of it?" I nodded. "I can't tell anyone yet. I need to figure things out." She guided me to the bed like I was glass. "Deep breaths, sweetheart. This is a lot." I stared at the ceiling. Yesterday I had nothing. My parents threw me out because they thought I was wasting my life. And now you're a millionaire," she said, her voice filled with awe. I turned to her, tears in my eyes. "My grandmother's numbers. He gave them to me. We always played together. I think she's still looking out for me." Rebecca took my hand and gave it a squeeze. "I believe it." That small kindness undid me. The tears came again, pouring out of me in deep sobs I couldn't control. The pain of rejection, the fear, the sudden swing of fortune. It all collided in that tiny motel room. When I could finally breathe again, one thing was clear. I needed help. And I needed to keep quiet until I had a plan. And more than anything, I needed to become the woman my grandmother believed I already was. Everything was about to change. I just had to make sure I didn't lose myself along the way. I didn't leave room for the entire next day. Not because I was paralyzed by fear, but because I knew this moment, this strange, unbelievable moment, needed to be handled with absolute precision. $37 million doesn't just fall into your lap. It crashes into your life like a wave. And if you're not ready, it drags you under. I spent that morning searching online for financial advisors, cross-referencing names and firms, reading articles about anonymous claims, and trying to absorb more information in one sitting than I had during my entire college career. Every site said the same thing. Before claiming a major lottery prize, assemble a team: lawyer, financial planner, and accountant. Trust no one. Protect your identity. Move slowly. My fingers hovered over my phone as I stared at the contact Rebecca had scrawled on a notepad the night before. James Spencer. Her cousin. Private, experienced, discreet. I took a breath and dialed. The man who answered didn't sound surprised by anything. He listened as I stumbled through the facts. Powerball winner, confirmed, signed, ticket in hand. He asked no unnecessary questions and offered a single response after I finished. "We should meet today." He gave me the address to his office downtown. Private suite. Neutral signage. The kind of place where high-profile problems get solved without drawing attention. I dressed simply in the same hoodie and jeans I'd been wearing for 2 days. No one needed to know yet that I wasn't the girl dragging a suitcase through the rain anymore. James looked like he belonged behind mahogany. Mid-40s, sharp features, quiet eyes. When I walked into his office, he didn't blink at my wrinkled clothes or tired face. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk and spoke like he'd been preparing for this moment since sunrise. "The first step is securing your winnings through a blind trust. This will allow you to remain anonymous in the state of Oregon. I've already prepared the paperwork." I sat down, stunned. "You're that sure?" James gave a polite smile. "Rebecca doesn't recommend lightly." We moved through the details. Trust name, nominee signer, tax structures. I didn't pretend to understand everything, but I took notes, asked questions, and refused to let the magnitude of it all numb me. By early afternoon, I had signed a stack of documents that would protect my identity, structure my assets, and set the groundwork for a financial life I had never dared to imagine. We talked goals. I told him I didn't want to live outrageously, but I needed a fresh start. He asked what reasonable liquidity meant to me. I hesitated. "I guess, enough to breathe. To get on my feet." He smiled. "For someone with your balance, a few $100,000 should do." I swallowed hard. 2 days ago, I was calculating how many nights I could afford at the motel. Now I was discussing liquid reserves in the 6-figure range like I was negotiating the cost of groceries. Before I left, I had one more request. "There's a motel," I said quietly, "where I've been staying. The owners, Rebecca and her husband, are struggling. They helped me when no one else would. I want to pay off their mortgage. James raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Anonymous donation through the trust? Yes. I don't want them to feel like they owe me anything. He nodded. Consider it handled. That afternoon I walked out of his office with a plan, a future and a name for the next chapter of my life already forming in my mind. I found a modest, sunlit apartment in a secure building downtown. Nothing ostentatious but clean, quiet and mine. The realtor hesitated when I offered to pay the full year's lease in cash, but James had given me the right language and paperwork to make it go smoothly. I signed, received the keys, and stood in the middle of an empty space that already felt more like home than anywhere else I'd ever lived. I didn't go shopping for designer bags or book a first-class ticket to somewhere tropical. I bought a new set of clothes, a high-performance laptop, basic furniture, and a jewelry workbench with the finest tools I could find. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to justify the cost of my own dream. The next morning, a delivery van arrived with hand-selected metals, stones, and packaging supplies. Everything I would need to relaunch the business I had once kept hidden from my own family. As I unwrapped each item, I could almost hear my grandmother's voice whispering, "It's time." I moved carefully, quietly. Rebecca was the only person outside James's office who knew the truth. Even Donald, her husband, only suspected something had changed. They still thought I was just a grateful guest who had finally caught a break. They didn't know I'd booked every room in their motel for the next week. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted to give them space to breathe financially without ever saying the words charity. I didn't owe anyone explanations. But soon there were people who would come looking for them anyway. And I needed to be ready. Carlton's Coffee had always been my favorite spot for quiet mornings. The chairs wobbled slightly, the staff was friendly but inattentive, and the coffee tasted just burnt enough to feel familiar. It was the kind of place where you could disappear into a corner and no one would ask you why. That day I didn't expect anyone to recognize me. I'd changed my number, my address, my habits. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't advertising either. I was waiting for my latte at the pickup counter when I heard it. A voice, soft but unmistakably familiar. "Kaitlyn." I turned slowly. Ethan stood a few feet away, holding a to-go cup, looking as stunned as I felt. His hair was a little shorter than I remembered, his shirt tucked into khakis, the same business casual uniform he'd worn since graduation. His expression flickered between guilt and curiosity. "I've been trying to reach you," he said, stepping closer. "You changed your number." "I got a new plan," I replied. "Technically true. You look different." I knew what he meant. The tailored blouse, the new boots, the quiet confidence in my stance. Everything about me said I wasn't the girl crying in the rain anymore. I gestured toward a table by the window. We sat down, the space between us filled with silence he didn't quite know how to close. "Mom and Dad have been worried," he said finally. "They thought you'd come back after cooling off for a day or two." I laughed. Short, sharp. "They kicked me out in the middle of a storm with nowhere to go. What made them think I'd come crawling back?" Ethan shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "They didn't mean for it to be permanent. Dad just wanted to scare you straight, I think." I stared at him. "You were there, Ethan. You heard every word. You watched me carry my suitcase out of that house. And you said nothing." He looked down at his coffee. I didn't know what to say. "That didn't stop you from telling them I was looking at apartments," I added. "That started this." He flinched visibly. "I thought they deserved to know. I wasn't trying to get you kicked out. But you did." We sat in another long silence, the kind that didn't invite resolution. "You seem like you're doing well," he said eventually. His eyes flicked again to my clothes, the gold watch on my wrist. "Did you get a new job or something?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that. I mean, we didn't know where you went. Mom was freaking out. She even tried to get in touch with your old therapist, Dr. Martinez." "I know. She called. And I didn't tell her much either." He nodded slowly. "Look, Kate, I'm not here to defend what happened. We all overreacted. But maybe you could talk to them. Let them apologize. Put things back together." I looked at him for a long moment. Ethan had always been the peacemaker. The bridge. But this time that bridge had burned and I'd walked away with the matches still in my hand. "You want things to go back to the way they were," I said quietly. "But I don't. That life wasn't working for me. I'm not the same person anymore. He swallowed hard. Are you happy? It was an honest question. The first one he'd asked that wasn't laced with someone else's agenda. Yes, I said. For the first time in years I am. Ethan leaned back trying to understand. You're still making jewelry? Among other things. He looked like he wanted to press for more but didn't. Maybe he could feel I wouldn't give him the answers he came for. We stood to leave, and as he reached for his coat he gave one last attempt. Mom and Dad, they miss you. Maybe if you called. I'm not the one who owes anyone an apology, I interrupted. But I'll think about it. As I walked away I felt something loosen in my chest. Not anger. Not revenge. Just distance. The necessary kind. The kind that lets you breathe. That evening my new phone buzzed for the first time with messages from 2 numbers I hadn't saved. From Dad, Ethan says you're doing well. We should talk. From Mom, please call us, sweetheart. We miss you. I didn't reply. Instead I unpacked a delivery that had just arrived. Silk display boxes, gold foil-stamped business cards, and a new banner for my brand's relaunch. Morgan's Legacy. I was finally building the life I wanted on my terms in silence. But silence doesn't last forever. And soon a voice from the past would come calling. Not with accusations but with questions. Ones I knew I couldn't avoid forever. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the call came. I was working in the spare bedroom of my apartment, sorting through newly arrived inventory, when the name flashed across my screen. Dr. Sophia Martinez. I hesitated. The last time I'd spoken to her had been 4 years ago, back when my parents insisted I see a therapist during college. They paid for the sessions and expected reports, even when they weren't entitled to them. I had stopped going after realizing that privacy wasn't something they truly respected. I answered anyway. Kaitlyn. Her voice was gentle, professional, but personal. Your mother gave me your number. She asked me to reach out. I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. I changed my number for a reason, Sophia. I know. And I debated whether to call. But this isn't a professional outreach. It's just concern. I didn't respond. There are rumors, she continued. Whispers around your neighborhood among extended family. Your sudden change in lifestyle. The fact that you've disappeared. People are wondering. Let me guess, I said, voice flat. They think I'm in trouble. Drugs. Gambling. Dating a mobster. She didn't say those exact words, Sophia replied. But she's confused. Worried. And honestly, she doesn't know how to approach you. I leaned against the doorframe, staring out the window. The city looked peaceful from this height. Quiet. Exactly what I'd worked so hard to find. I'm fine, I said. And what happened between me and my parents, it's not something they get to rewrite just because I seem to be doing well. I agree, Sophia said. But sometimes, it helps to process things aloud. Not for them, for you. Would you consider one session? Just to talk. No reports. No pressure. My treat. I didn't want to say yes. But something in her tone, the absence of judgment, the familiar steadiness, wore down my resistance. One session, I said. And I'll pay for it myself. I can afford it now. The next day I sat in Sophia's office in the same tan armchair I'd once hated. But this time it felt different. I wasn't the girl trying to fix herself to fit someone else's expectations. I was a woman trying to understand what she wanted to keep, and what she was ready to let go. We talked. Not about the money, not directly. But about the rejection. The betrayal. The fear. The night I slept in a motel room while my parents watched TV in a warm house, thinking they'd taught me a lesson. We talked about control. About dignity. About the ache that comes when people who raised you refuse to see you. And then Sophia asked me something that landed like a stone in my chest. What do you want from them, Kaitlyn? If they stood in front of you right now, what would you ask for? I thought for a long time before answering. Respect. Not just tolerance for my choices, but actual respect. I want acknowledgement that what they did was wrong, not just poorly handled. And I want them to understand that my success is not a redemption of their plan. It's mine. Alone. Sophia nodded. Then you're going to have to tell them. Not everything. But something. If you want a relationship to continue, it needs to start on your terms. He was right. I had been hiding behind silence, thinking it protected me. But silence also leaves space for others to fill in their own versions of your story. 3 days later, I stepped into the marble lobby of my building and saw them, my mother and father sitting side by side on a leather bench beneath the chandelier. My mother rose as soon as she saw me. "Kaitlyn," she breathed. "Thank God." My father stood slower. His gaze took in the polished floors, the concierge desk, the security guard who greeted me by name. "How did you find me?" I asked calmly. "Ethan followed you home after your coffee," my mother admitted. "We didn't know what else to do." "As you can see," I said, gesturing around me, "I'm fine. More than fine." "Kaitlyn," my father said, stepping forward. "What's going on? How can you afford all of this?" I looked at them, the people who had taught me how to walk, how to write, how to survive, but never how to believe in myself. "Would you like to come upstairs?" I asked. "We have a lot to talk about." They followed me in silence to my apartment, their footsteps quiet on the hallway carpet. When we stepped inside, they both stopped. The high ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the artwork, the warmth. "This place must cost a fortune," my father murmured. $3,000 a month, I said simply. "Paid in full for the year." My mother's fingers brushed the sleeve of my cashmere sweater. "Please," she whispered, "tell us what's going on. Are you in trouble?" I walked to the coffee table, pulled my wallet from my bag and took out the ticket. The edges were laminated now. Protected. Sacred. I handed it to my father. "What's this?" "Grandma's numbers," I said. "The ones we played every week. The ones she gave me before she died. That's the ticket. I played them the night you told me I wasn't worth the roof over my head." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's eyes scanned the numbers in disbelief. You won. 37 million after taxes." Silence stretched across the room like a chasm. My father tried to speak first. "Kaitlyn, this is incredible." I stepped back, voice steady. 3 weeks ago you called my dreams a fantasy. My work. Trinkets. You read my diary. You pushed me out. And now you want a seat at my table?" My mother's tears spilled over. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We were trying to teach you responsibility." "No," I said, "you were trying to control me. And you lost." They stood speechless, the weight of everything finally settling. And then my father spoke again, quieter this time. "What do you want from us now?" I looked at them, really looked. "I want acknowledgement that what you did wasn't discipline. It was cruelty. I want boundaries. I want respect. And I want it understood that my money is not your reward for letting me go." My mother nodded slowly. "Of course." I watched them absorb it all, and I knew they weren't ready to fully understand. But maybe, just maybe, they were willing to try. "I'm hosting dinner next Saturday," I said as I walked them to the door. "Ethan's invited. You're too. We can talk more then. But only if you come ready to meet the woman I've become. Not the girl you remember." They left without another word. And as the door closed, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. The next chapter wasn't going to be easy. But it would be mine. Saturday arrived with a tension I couldn't shake. The apartment was clean, the wine decanted, the table set for 6. From the outside it might have looked like any other family dinner. But every piece of flatware, every plate, every candle had been chosen not for comfort but for control. This dinner wasn't about reunion. It was about truth. At 6:45 the intercom buzzed. I let them up without a word. My parents arrived first. My father in a blazer I'd never seen him wear before, my mother holding a pie she had probably baked to remind us both of simpler times. I didn't react. Just ushered them in with a nod. Ethan and his girlfriend Lisa followed 10 minutes later. Lisa was exactly the kind of woman Ethan would date now. Thoughtful eyes, paint-streaked fingers, a quiet presence. She looked at me like she already knew who I really was. Dinner began with surface-level small talk. My mother commented on the rosemary chicken. My father complimented the view. Lisa said she loved the linen napkins. For a few minutes I let it go on. Let them think this was going to be easy. Then I set down my fork. "Before we go any further," I said, "I want to clarify something. This dinner isn't an olive branch. It's a threshold. If you want to be part of my life, it starts with truth." Silence. My father cleared his throat. "Kaitlyn, we know we handled things poorly." "That's not enough," I said. "What happened wasn't just poor handling. It was rejection. You didn't just question my choices. You dismissed my worth. You made me feel like garbage for believing in myself. And when I needed you most, you turned me out. My mother's hands shook as she reached for her glass. We thought you'd come back. That you'd realize we were right. You hoped fear would break me into obedience, I said, voice steady. Instead, it broke your place in my life. Across the table, Ethan said nothing. He looked at Lisa, who nodded slightly. Then he finally spoke. She's not wrong, he said to our parents. I was there. I didn't stop you. I should have. I was scared of becoming the target. My father looked stunned. Not by me but by Ethan. Maybe it had never occurred to him that the son who played by the rules had regrets too. I'm not asking for a grand apology, I continued. I'm asking for recognition. That I am not your project. I am your daughter. And I deserve to be treated with respect whether I fail or succeed. My mother nodded slowly, eyes brimming. You do. And I see now how wrong we were to try and shape you into something we understood, instead of supporting the person you already were. It wasn't everything. But it was a beginning. My father, who had rarely struggled for words, finally managed. I didn't know. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. You were protecting yourself from discomfort, I corrected. You couldn't stand that I saw value in something you didn't understand. No one argued. Because they knew I was right. The conversation softened after that. Not because the hard things had vanished, but because they had finally been said out loud. We moved from truth into curiosity. My mother asked about my studio. My father tried, awkwardly, to inquire about the business, though his questions circled taxes and logistics more than creativity. I answered with boundaries. As dessert was served, my mother slid a small package across the table. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a photo album. My childhood. Me in art camp. Me holding glitter-covered crafts. Me with my grandmother, both of us laughing in the garden. I found it last week, my mother said softly. Thought you should have it. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I simply nodded. As they got ready to leave, my father pulled me aside at the door. He gestured toward the necklace my mother was wearing, lapis lazuli on a gold chain. You made that, right? He asked. I did. He looked at it for a long moment. It's beautiful. Truly. I don't think I ever really looked before. That small sentence, simple as it was, hit harder than any apology. Thanks, I said. Maybe next time I'll show you my studio. I'd like that, he replied. As the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet of my apartment, unsure of how I felt. It wasn't joy. It wasn't victory. It was something quieter. Like a sigh after holding your breath too long. The money hadn't fixed everything. But it had given me what I'd needed most. Freedom. Freedom to speak. To choose. To be. And for the first time, the people who once silenced me were starting to listen. Still, I knew this wasn't the end. Because what I was building wasn't just reconciliation. It was a legacy. The gallery buzzed with voices, soft music, and the occasional clink of wine glasses. Morgan's legacy. Those two words now glowed above the entryway in brass script, etched into glass, framed by warm lighting. I stood beneath them not as someone who had won the lottery, but as someone who had earned every inch of this space. It had been exactly 1 year since the night I stood in the rain with a suitcase and nowhere to go. Since then, my life had changed in ways money couldn't have predicted. The business I'd once called a side hustle was now a thriving jewelry brand sold in boutiques across the country. I'd hired 2 assistants, both young women like I once was, full of potential, short on support, and watched them grow into artists in their own right. The Pinewood Motel, where I spent my first night homeless, was now a renovated artist retreat. Rebecca and Donald managed it as co-owners, not just survivors. They still didn't know it was me who paid off their mortgage, though Rebecca had given me a knowing look the last time I visited. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. As I walked through the gallery, I touched each display case gently. Each piece in the collection had a name. Unbroken. Inheritance. Rainlight. Every one of them was crafted from the stones I once used in secret, now set in metals that caught the light the way truth catches breath. Michael appeared at my side, wrapping an arm around my waist. He was still the same man who'd fallen for me without knowing anything about the money. He once joked that my expensive dinner choices made sense now, but he still preferred the taco truck where we'd had our first date. I liked that about him. He wasn't impressed by wealth. He was impressed by vision. Near the refreshment table, my parents stood awkwardly, sipping wine and chatting with a local art dealer. My mother wore a silver and garnet set I'd made just for her. My father stood beside her, quiet but watching, trying not to look out of place in his charcoal blazer. They had shown up on time, brought a thoughtful gift, and most importantly, hadn't said a word about investments or taxes. Small steps, but meaningful. Ethan arrived with Lisa, now his fiancée. She had been one of the first artists the Morgan's Legacy Foundation had funded. Ironically, it was through her that Ethan had finally started to understand the world I lived in, the one he'd once dismissed as impractical. He now helped me manage parts of the foundation's operations, lending his structured mind to a mission built on risk and hope. He never talked about the night I was kicked out. He didn't have to. He'd made it clear through action that he knew where he'd gone wrong. Toward the back of the room, I spotted Amber. She stood next to a woman wearing one of my signature necklaces and waved me over when I approached. "The proverbial overnight success," Amber said with a grin. "Only took 10 years of working your butt off plus a lottery miracle." I laughed. The money helped, sure. But it wouldn't have mattered if I hadn't already known exactly what I wanted to create. "That part," she said. "That's what makes it real." Before I could respond, I felt a tug at my sleeve. A young girl, maybe 9 or 10, stood beside me, her eyes wide as she looked at one of the display cases. "Did you make all of these?" she asked. I smiled. "I did. I want to do that," she said. "Someday." I crouched to her level and nodded. "Then start with what you have. Buttons, beads, paper clips. Anything. The world doesn't care how fancy your tools are. It just needs your voice." She beamed, and her mother called her back, giving me a thankful smile as they walked away. I stood back up and my father joined me, glancing at the girl before looking at me. "She reminded me of you at that age," he said quietly. "Always turning scraps into something beautiful." "You just didn't see it back then," I replied. He nodded. "That's true. I didn't know how." There was no defensiveness in his tone. Just something like honesty. "She's going to be something," he added, watching the girl disappear into the crowd. "She already is," I said. The crowd thinned out slowly, guests trickling into the Portland night. I lingered in the quiet that followed, walking among the displays as Michael locked the doors and turned off the music. Alone in the gallery, I ran my fingers along the final piece in the collection. Ocean Memory. Lapis lazuli set in a flowing gold shape that mimicked waves. The same necklace my father had complimented months ago. I thought about what would have happened if I had never checked the lottery ticket. If I had thrown it away in frustration, let the bitterness of that night define me. I would still be creating. Maybe not at this scale. Maybe not with this reach. But I would still be building something from the ashes they left me in. Because that's what artists do. Michael came up behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking," I said softly, "about how the money didn't make me who I am. It just let me stop asking for permission." He kissed my temple. "That's why it worked. You were already ready." Maybe that was the most surprising part of this whole journey. The lottery didn't change me. It revealed me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need validation. I didn't need approval. I had legacy. And I had earned it with nothing more than 2 hands, a suitcase, and the belief that I was worth more than anyone ever told me. So maybe this story wasn't just about luck or money or even revenge. Maybe it was about what happens when someone dares to believe in themselves after everyone else has turned away. Maybe it was about choosing your own path, even when it hurts. Because the night I was left with nothing was also the night I was handed everything that mattered. Clarity, freedom, and a chance to build the life I was meant for. Not all second chances come in the form of a winning ticket. Sometimes, they come when you finally decide to stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. So let me ask you, what would you do if you had the freedom to start over completely on your own terms? If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of your worth or of someone else who needs that reminder, go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, they speak to something real.